Hello friends. I figured it was time for me to start shooting some YouTube videos again. I guess it's about 1.5 years ago since I published my last in the nature video like this. And I'd like to tell you why. Back in May of 2020, I was in the woods back home in Norway. Currently I'm in Sweden. Beautiful ocean down here below. I was exploring in the woods around my home in Norway conspiracy theory. And I was applying my psychological archetypal lens to give what I thought was a deep dive into the dynamics of the human psyche that cause conspiracy theory to arise. Back at that time, we were still at the early days of the pandemic, and I knew less then than I know now. I guess we all did. And shortly after, I started finding myself humbled by the kind of realizations that started to happen in my life. As somebody who is deeply immersed in a school of rationality, growing up in an academic family, albeit being also from early on quite deeply immersed in a school of magic, coming through my mother's line, and being deeply into Tibetan Buddhism, having had my childhood Christian faith. All of that is a paradox, but primarily it's my father's lineage of rationality that has really governed my life. And that was even after I created Reclaim Your Throne. That is a deep dive into the underworld, into the liminal, into the place of death and rebirth, where identities burn to the ground and we come to discover ourselves in a new light as we come back up to the surface. That was all true, so paradoxical in a way. But the phenomenological reality that was clearly present around me in no way fit with the narrative that was being peddled by institutions, by politicians, by medical authorities. And back then it was very confusing to me, like, what is going on? Like, what the hell? And I didn't want to speak about it because I didn't understand. Throughout all of 2021, I went on a journey with my podcast, Walking with the Archetypes, where gradually I started to be awakened to some things that hadn't been clear to me previously. And I think, for the most part, because my rational mind was stubborn and didn't want to accept these things which I saw. Well, it's clear to me now that the video I recorded in May 2020 didn't do justice to what actually is happening. And so I'm back now with more clarity of the kind of madness, the kind of obstruction of truth, institutional capture and corruption and in fact, conspiracy that has been going on. And from my sense of identity, it's not the kind of conversation I would like to have. But seeing as the main focus and passion in my life is initiation, there is no justification for denying what is becoming clear to everyone who has their critical thinking intact, denying that that is happening. And gradually, over these next videos, I will start to speak more about these things. And if you have been following my Walking with the Archetypes podcast that you can find on Spotify and on Apple, then some of this will be familiar to you. But shit's pretty crazy right now. In ways my mind find very hard to accept and understand. But from the archetypal perspective and from the group psychology perspective, we know this landscape very well from pre-war, pre-Second World War, mass formation psychosis in Germany, and various other strange, virulent psychological memes that have even happened in my lifetime. Now, it is clear now that the politicians in my home country, where I no longer live, partly because of what I'm about to say, are corrupt and or incompetent. And pretty crazy to realize that over such a short amount of time, how completely whack they are. One of the questions that I've asked myself a lot is, how is that possible? Are they paid to lie to us? Are they merely incompetent? Are they threatened? Are people coming to them in the middle of the night telling them that they will kill their children if they don't obey? Are they mad? I don't know. Are they evil? I have no answers to this. But I do know by now, as do many of you, that this pandemic narrative is a complete virtual reality. And as we are now pretty much 2 years into this, more and more people are facing psychological distress. The price of isolation is tremendous. Yeah. And I can understand that people just wanted to go away. From that perspective, I understand why people just want to obey and trust that somebody has got this under control. Well, we know very well by now, based on all of the corruption of data, like even just a few days ago, this new narrative that 40% of the people who were in hospitals for COVID were not there for COVID, but with COVID. And of course, this is a familiar narrative to anyone who has been making sense of the world from other sources than their television. But now, for some reason, that is official narrative. Of course, we know that the Omicron strain is not very dangerous at all, yet we really need those passports, don't we? Shit's not making sense. It's not adding up. And we are faced with the reality that we are in times of worlds colliding. And one of those worlds, which is the world of trusting institutions, of trusting politicians, one of those worlds may be expiring soon. So let's look at this bifurcation that is happening in our culture, where there is a split right down the center of our culture, where the world is being polarized into a kind of tribal mindset around narratives of the pandemic, of climate change, politics. But I'm going to focus in on the one which is happening around the pandemic. As the loyalty to worldviews is changing very much for the various camps, where the left is increasingly excited about control, whereas they used to be excited about the little man having freedom, and the right to used to be associated more with control and are now more excited about freedom for the working class. These strange configurations, these strange calibrations are happening now. That is suggesting that some big things are moving in the collective of humanity. And so no wonder that we're finding these huge meta-narratives that are driving a wedge down the center. It appears to me that there are two primary camps that we are stuck in. And this number two seems to be quite essential for polarization. If there's a third entity, it's much harder to polarize the people. And so for whatever forces have been driving this wedge down the center of this culture seems to have been very deliberate at making it two camps and not three. And the first camp is one of trusting the science in a kind of religious way, where there is no room for questioning, where there is no room for science, actual science. We're watching a kind of new religion, a scientism emerge, where scientists are saints, and if you don't kiss their feet, you are not among the people of salvation. That's one quality of the first camp. There is the distortion of the idea of truth to mean that there is no objective reality, there is no truth, there is just a postmodern woke version of it, which is where the idea is, it's my truth. Don't step on my truth. And when we have that idea actually as the cornerstone of a pandemic strategy, well, you're in camp one, if you like that. We have a worship of a new kind of oligarchic, scientific, materialist, reductionist, upper class. There is a demand that we do not trust ourselves. We should not listen to our bodies. We should not have personhood. And if you're somehow veering from the narrative according to the rules of this camp, you're evil. It seems to be headed towards some kind of surveillance, society with an upper class that is looking at the people as sheep, as peasants of some kind. And these peasants are expected to just obey and to just surrender their agency in order to fit in with the herd that obeys the narrative. This is happening in ways and at orders of magnitude that I find utterly shocking. How seemingly intelligent people are now falling into this camp has boggled my mind, really. Like how is this even possible? It's crazy stuff. We're just parading straight into artificial intelligence as if it's some kind of saving grace, some kind of boon, with not seemingly having any considerations as to the ethical implications, the kind of dystopian scenarios that could evolve if we have AI that learns through big data and machine learning and actually comes to be more advanced than us. How do we govern this technology? But, rather than putting on the brakes, we're actually, in this camp one, it's rather a direction and idealization of transhumanism, of getting all kinds of gene-altering manipulation technology inside of our bodies, chips inside of our bodies, and this is supposed to be very exciting. Gender, sex, obviously, is being completely relativized so as to move the human being closer to the machine. Because when you have no level of grounding in your sex, now there's no polarization, there's no actual sex, intimacy is gone, families start disappearing, and more this cyborg human emerges out of this first timeline, this smart city, surveillance, society timeline. And people are actually excited to be in this, which is kind of, as I said, it boggles the mind. The second branch of humanity's development is one where we are really anchoring into our human bodies. We become proud of being men and women again. We trust ourselves, as opposed to the first branch, the first bifurcation branch, where you're expected to have some kind of internal misogyny, where you only trust the toxic patriarchy that has fed you ideas of how machine and technology and science is better than the human. Then in the second timeline, we find a trust in the feminine, and also a stronger masculine, a stronger man that doesn't just lay down and cry when the world gets hard. And he also doesn't turn into this nice guy who is as prone to becoming tyrants as anyone. If there's one thing that is clear by now, is that the politicians, the leaders that we only recently, 2 years ago, considered to be nice men, Macron, Trudeau, Biden, they are converting very fast to a tyrant political overclass that cares nothing for the peasant population. And how could it be otherwise? They have no internal rightness with the dynamic of power. Furthermore, in this second branch, there is a harmonizing between technology and nature. There's no denial or rejection of nature, that is, of technology. Only a crazy person thinks that you can fight technology, but there is a desire here in this more beautiful world timeline, as I choose to see it. I call it the sanctuary timeline, where technology finds its right place, much like the mind as a servant and not a master. The mind, the human mind, the so-called rational mind, and technology are part and parcel of the same. So any person that is entirely identified with their mind will always choose the first bifurcation branch of humanity. But you know, the established tradition of rationality is breaking down. And so in this second branch, there is an emergence of trans-rationality, where the mind is actually starting to be a servant of the self, a spiritual experience of being fully in contact with human beings and with nature. We are no longer willing to be deluded. We're no longer willing to be led astray by simplistic narratives about good and evil, right and wrong, belonging, not belonging. These tribal narratives, they don't belong in this second branch. And so the important thing here is that while these are two main camps, there are many permutations of this. For instance, it's way too simplistic, and if you were to think in this way, it's indicative that you are in a tribal paradigm. It's way too simplistic to think that the first camp is the people who have had the treatment and the second camp is the people who have not. It's not like that. We're not split down a conflict line around being jabbed, having the treatment. The conflict is whether we are for or against tyranny. And so there are many people who had the thing, who are in the second camp. Many are regretting their choice as they are watching the failed strategies. They're watching the technology that they thought would save us fail to deliver on its promises. And I'm looking at all kinds of people exhibiting clear despair that their hope in this becoming a thing of the past because of this mRNA technology, that promise has been broken. And what do they do now? What do they do now? It's a challenging place to be. So we need to understand here that we're not in a horizontal war of treated, untreated, left or right or whatever. We are in a war, shall we say, if we're going to use that paradigm or that idea, between people who believe in tyranny and people who do not. People who believe in sovereignty and people who do not. People who believe in bodily autonomy and people who do not. And I'm watching a lot of people that I thought were smart, that were loyal to reality, really struggle with knowing how to navigate this situation because they're terrified. They realize that things aren't what they're being told, but at the same time, they're not willing to live in a reality where the institutions are breaking down all around us, because that's too much to deal with for them. And so they're falling down the hole of disinformation, where their loyalty to their mind leads them to be in disconnect with phenomenological reality. So there is no level of embodiment that allows them to actually be in reality as it exists around them. And that's when you start having a lot of psychological maladies and mass formation psychosis, which has become more and more well known lately as an academic term. Now, in archetypal language, I would call it dysregulation from ego structures being unable to contain the infusion of archetypal energy. And so there's a capturing of the ego by the archetypes. And so people who actually, from an ego place, see themselves as sort of sweet and nice, they're actually captured by archetypal energies, like the warrior that they don't know how to regulate because they're not in right relationship with dynamics of power, it turns them into a sadist because they're afraid of the masochistic part of them. People that are unable to lead themselves, they turn into tyrants or supporters of tyrants, because the king archetype inside of them, the sovereign, is completely dysregulated. And this is where we're at. And, as I said, I've been speaking a lot to this on the Walking with the Archetypes podcast. So just look that up if you want more information on this. But I think that's it for now. It's been a strange journey for me, as I'm sure it has been for you. And maybe this video, maybe you're watching this and like, hey, this is not the Eivind that I know from the last time. And then that's fine, it's you haven't had the initiation that I've had. And maybe you will and maybe you won't. But there are two initiations that we need to go through, and I will return to that topic in the future. The two main initiations that we need to experience in order to be agents of change in this. So I will leave you with this. If you're seeing through the narrative, if you're seeing through the smokescreen and propaganda from camp number 2, it's very important to not become hostile to the people who are, as of now, unable to. Well, because you have had the initiation into truth along this particular axis of meaning making, but you may not have had the second initiation into love. So I guess I am actually speaking about it here. And the most important thing at this point is to love each other. Let us be greater men than allowing these narratives that have been created for us to tear us apart. There are a lot of weak men in charge in the world today. Let us not be like them. Let us not be like little Macron, who just wants to terrorize and make the lives of the unvaccinated hard. Very small man, weak man. Let us not be like him. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. Have a good day, and I will be back with more soon. And if you're wanting to be part of the community that we're building around this second timeline, then you're welcome to join us inside of Sanctuary, our new community platform on innerthrone.com/sanctuary, where we are in deep dialogue and have meaning making and transformational events in order to ensure that the new and more beautiful world becomes reality, because it will. It will. Be well.